We have a short agenda, but we do have a lengthy presentation scheduled, which will be a vital information piece for our CIP process and for our 2022 budget. So we have that coming up actually first on the agenda, and that is our fleet management study and report that was done this year by Mercury and Associates. So at this point, I'll welcome our representatives from Mercury and have them begin their presentation. And I don't see that we have anyone on WebEx, but the meeting is also being broadcast by public access. So if any of the additional council members who aren't with us or members of the public are interested, they'll be able to see the presentation as well. So welcome, gentlemen.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much.
Turn it over to you.
Awesome. I don't know if this is on or not.
I believe it's on, yes.
Great.
You kind of have to be a little closer to that one. It's not as sensitive as these, but it's on.
Gotcha. How's that? Is that better?
Perfect.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We're excited to be here tonight. My name is Tony Yankovich. I'm a managing director of Mercury Associates, and I lead our state and local government fleet management consulting group. With me tonight is Scott Rood. He was the lead technical analyst on the project with us. So we will be doing the presentation for you tonight. It was a rather lengthy study. It took about 5 months to complete and resulted in a fleet report document of about 90 pages and several supporting documents that were provided in addition to the report. So we won't obviously have time tonight to go through in great detail in all of the areas, but what we thought we would do is give you a brief introduction on who we were, who we are, what we do, and then jump right into the key study findings and recommendations. So with that, for those of you that are not familiar with Mercury Associates, we are a dedicated fleet management consulting firm. What that means is every day when we wake up, we're dealing with fleet issues for organizations across North America. We are what we like to say professional fleet consultants with real-world experience. And what that means is that every one of our professional consultants has been there, done that. We have all been fleet managers, mostly in government situations or private fleets. And so we've managed the fleets that we're discussing. We're familiar with the challenges of running a municipal government fleet. And so we do have practical experience to go along with our consulting experience. Mercury was formed in 2002 as a dedicated fleet management consulting firm. And since then, we've completed somewhere in the range of 650 to 675 fleet consultant studies throughout North America and throughout the world, actually. About 85% of the work that we do is with government fleets at the federal, state, and local levels. We do a lot of colleges and university fleet studies as well as corporate and private fleets. As I mentioned, Scott and I both have considerable experience in the fleet industry. Both of us have over 30 years of experience doing what we're doing. I was a fleet asset manager for a fleet of 1,200 vehicles and pieces of equipment with the city of Kansas City, Kansas for about 12 years before I began my consulting career. And I've been a fleet management consultant for a little over 20 years now. Scott Rood has about 32 years of experience. I like to say Scott grew up with a wrench in his hand. He joined the United States Air Force as a technician, started on the shop floor as a mechanic, worked his way up, became a fleet manager in the United States Air Force. After 22 years, retired from the Air Force, went to work in government fleet management, went to work for the state of Washington's fleet organization, and then went to work as the fleet manager for Clark County, Washington. So again, Scott started out as a mechanic, earned very high credentials. He is a certified automotive fleet manager from NAFA, as well as a former ASE certified master technician. We also used other consultants on our staff that are obviously not here tonight. Again, a high-level review of what the objectives of this study was. Really, we were asked to review the fleet program to determine if it aligned with best management practices in the industry. Basically, are we doing what we should be doing, and how well are we doing it? Then we were asked to benchmark performance in specific areas of fleet management and maintenance and repair. So we do a lot of benchmarking studies. We've actually are the leaders in the industry when it comes to identifying what the benchmarks for certain activities are. And so we were asked to calculate where data was available, the performance in many areas of fleet management and fleet maintenance and repair. So we did those where possible. And then really the goal of the study was not necessarily to look backwards, but to look forwards and identify opportunities for improvement and how we can help the motor pool division get better in the future years. And so I also like to remind people, you know, you guys didn't invite us to come in and do a project for the city of Wausau to get pats on the back. So our focus was necessarily on areas for improvement. So they do a lot of things right. Work is getting done. Vehicles are on the street. The vehicles are safe. So they should be credited for that, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. We did mention in the final report document areas where they did exceed expectations and met standards and exceeded standards. So those are available to look at, but for tonight what we're doing is really focusing on the opportunities for improvement. So the specific scope of work that we were looking at really touched on these primary areas. Organizational structure and staffing levels. So we wanted to identify if they had the resources necessary to adequately perform the activities that they were charged with. We were asked to look at whether a centralized fleet organization as they have now, or would a decentralized organization be more effective and provide lower cost and higher service levels for the customer departments. We looked at all types of activities when it comes to maintenance and repair, everything from the PM program to use of sublet vendors, to work processes in the shop, to performance metrics of technician productivity, for example. We also looked at the use of sublet services. Sublet services is work that is sublet to commercial vendors for a number of different reasons. We also looked at fleet acquisition and disposal practices. We looked at the current chargeback rate system, where the motor pool charges the users and customers for the goods and services that they consume. We looked at fleet replacement practices, and then we looked at the proposed fleet maintenance facility plans. We know that you had another A&E firm come in and develop plans in a three-phased approach to essentially renovate and improve that area that they are now. And one of those components, phase one, was actually reconstructing or constructing a new fleet maintenance shop. We do a lot of work in that area where we're not architects, we're not engineers, but we do a lot of fleet management and fleet maintenance programming where we identify space requirements for fleet maintenance facilities based on the operational needs of the clients. So a couple of comments when we talk about concepts in fleet management. These are terms that you'll hear quite frequently in our presentation today. So thought it'd be necessary to go ahead and at least give you a high-level overview of what they are. I like to say these are the three key elements of any fleet management program. One is the workload, one is the workforce, and the other is the workplace. These really need to be balanced for an effective and cost-efficient fleet organization. The workload is really what needs to be done. What is the work that needs to be accomplished by either the technicians, by the support staff, by the analyst, by the fleet manager, really anything within the organization that needs to be performed. We do this primarily through a system that we've developed called the VSRS. That's the Vehicle Statistical Referencing System. And what that allows us to do is to assign every single asset in the fleet a workload value in the terms of vehicle equivalency units, or VEUs. So an organization can tell me, hey, we have 500 vehicles in our fleet. Okay, that's great. That gives me an idea of the size of your fleet. But what's more important is I want to know how many VEUs are in that fleet. So VEUs allow us to calculate and quantify the workload requirements. So a VEU for a standard administrative sedan is generally 1.0, and we know that VEU element is associated with a certain number of direct labor hours per year to maintain that asset. On the other hand, a standard sedan that's used in law enforcement applications that's upfitted with the emergency equipment, driven in severe duty, is generally somewhere between 2 and 2.5 VEUs. So even though it's still a sedan, it has a much greater VEU value or workload requirement simply because it requires a lot more effort to maintain. The workforce are the people that's going to do the work, whether that's in-house technicians, where it's commercial vendors, whether it's someone that you bring in to do the work at your shop. It's who's going to actually affect the work that needs to be accomplished. And the workplace is, where is this work going to take place? Is it going to be in an in-house shop, or is it going to be through commercial vendors? So really what we do is we look at all three of these elements when we do a fleet management best practices assessment. So a quick profile of the fleet. Essentially, there are almost 500 assets in the fleet. So assets to us are anything that is maintained and managed by the fleet organization, our motor pool division. So obviously, all the vehicles, pickup trucks, SUVs, street sweepers, snow plows, the sanders, the spreaders, the trailers, the yellow iron, the backhoes, the loaders, but also the small engine equipment that is maintained by the organization as well. So really, any asset that's maintained by the fleet organization. There were 116 unique classes of vehicles and pieces of equipment. Almost all of the fleet is owned. There is a small percentage of the fleet that is being leased currently. The workload associated with those 476 assets is 859.3 VEUs. So again, that's the critical number as we went through the study. And the average age of the fleet, which also tells us a lot about the fleet management and replacement practices, is about 10.3 years. And that's an issue that we will come back to quite frequently today. So distribution of fleet, this is by asset count. As you can see, the Public Works Department is the primary owner of fleet assets, followed by fire and police, and then sewer utility and the airport have a few units as well. So again, in order to keep this somewhat brief, we'll jump right into the key findings. This is by no means all of our findings. Like I mentioned, we looked at about 100 specific program areas, and we've narrowed it down for this meeting tonight to what we consider the key findings of our study. So the good news is the foundational elements of a fleet program exist. There's a centralized approach to fleet management, which is consistent with industry standards and industry best practices. There are quite a few formal policies and procedures and even SOPs that have been developed and designed over the course of a number of years, which is excellent. There is the PM program, which is really essential to any fleet operation. In fact, one of the most important elements of a fleet organization is the PM program. The design is there. They've taken a lot of time and effort. They have a good understanding of what a proper PM program should look like. They've worked on developing, and Scott will get into this a little bit later, but specific checklists for specific asset counts or asset classifications. So the program design is there, the execution not quite there yet. And in the past, generally the use of commercial vendors was to meet either overflow demand or specialty demand. We would never, especially for a fleet this size, we would never recommend that the city of Wausau be in the body and paint business. You should not be in the windshield and glass business. You should not be in the major component rebuild business. It's just done better on the outside with people that do that every single day. They can do it better, cheaper, and faster than you can if you do one transmission rebuild a year, whereas they're doing transmission rebuilds every single day. However, recently, with staffing shortages and other demands, they've been relying on commercial vendors to a greater degree to meet that resource requirement as well, which is appropriate. So the fleet activity performance summary, again, we looked at nearly 100 specific activities where we formally evaluated them. Each activity was rated at below standard, meet standard, or above standard. If these were all above standard, we wouldn't be here. You wouldn't need us. So obviously, generally, we're asked to come in where opportunities for improvement exist, not where you're a high-performing fleet and you just want a pat on the back. So this is not surprising. Don't be alarmed when you see this. When we talk about meet standards, again, that doesn't mean improvement opportunities don't exist within those activities. It just means that, generally speaking, they meet most of the criteria of an effective program, whatever that activity is. And below standards are areas where they may be doing something, they may be doing it right, but there might be an aspect of that where they're not tracking performance, they're not reporting on the performance metric, or the performance metric possibly falls well below what it should be. So really, when we start looking for deficiencies within the fleet program, the primary one, and the one that you'll hear us go back to several times tonight, is adequate resources are not available. Again, I don't think this is alarming or surprising to most people, but it primarily starts with the staffing levels. They are, and we'll get into the details a little bit, but they are grossly understaffed. The workforce is not designed appropriately to meet the workload. Now, that is obviously because of the vacancies that they currently have, but it's also because the workload would even exceed the current, budgeted position numbers. And also the facilities. It's not, I mean, the facilities aren't absolutely terrible. It's not that they're unsafe and they can't be worked in. They certainly can be used as a fleet maintenance facility at this time. However, they don't have the necessary number of bays. The effective size of the base is not appropriate. The adjacencies is not appropriate. The space allocations aren't necessarily appropriate. So the facility is a real issue as well. The organization, and I say essentially 9 positions because there is a parts clerk or inventory specialist position that is kind of shared with Public Works, so it's dedicated, I think, 0.5 FTEs to the fleet program, and the other part of her time was spent in Public Works administration type activities. The fleet manager at the time of the study had dual roles. Not only was the manager of fleet, but also the manager of facilities. And there's no fleet analyst or support staff to actually support the fleet organization, whether it be administratively, whether it be in technology, whether it be in the use and application of the fleet management information system, or whether it just be an analytical support to develop these KPIs and performance measures and to report on activities within the organization. So this is what the motor pool division looks like currently. The blue boxes are the ones that represent people in the motor pool division. As you can see, the stockroom specialist is really underneath Public Works, Engineering, and Project Management and under administration. And then we have, well, at the time of the study, there were 2 vacant technician positions at the bottom. The most important thing on this slide really to point out is that there are currently, at the time of the study, there were 3.5 FTE wrench turning positions. So in our eyes, wrench turning positions means how much of a person's time is actively spent in maintaining and repairing the fleet. How much of time is basically with a wrench in your hand doing work on vehicles and pieces of equipment. And again, Scott will get into this a little bit more, but the technicians, because they have other requirements and responsibilities within the organization, all of their time is not spent on fleet activities or fleet maintenance and repair activities. The workload, when we start talking about the workload, again, we've identified the number of assets, we've identified the total number of VEUs. We know that a shop of this type, the mechanic should be able to turn wrenches for about 1,450 direct labor hours a year, which would be considered reasonable productivity for a technician. We also know that the demand hours to maintain and repair this fleet is over 10,300 hours of direct maintenance repair to maintain this fleet. And when you look at that, if you take 10,312 divided by the 1,450 targeted hours for each technician, you see that the technicians required to adequately maintain the current fleet is 7.1 technicians. And again, if you look at the slide before, we can see that we only had 6 technician positions at the time. So what we've done is developed what we consider the recommended organizational chart for the fleet operation. And the first thing to notice is really, motor pool division is an old term. People use motor pool nowadays as a term to reference actually renting vehicles and pieces of equipment from a central pool of vehicles. So there are shared pools. That's not really what they're doing. The term motor pool is antiquated. We think a better representation of what their authority levels and responsibilities are would be fleet management division. That's what most municipal government fleet organizations are called nowadays, is fleet management division, because you're really managing the assets. The other thing that we've done is again, suggested or recommended that the fleet manager, the fleet is of sufficient size that it requires a full-time position. That position should not have split responsibilities, really should be spent managing the entire fleet. We've also moved that parts or warehouse stockroom specialist position underneath fleet. The size and composition of the fleet, the workload required of the technicians supports a full-time parts clerk. However, this parts clerk should be a fleet experience and fleet expert parts clerk, not someone that just is processing invoices and charging account numbers to a budget ledger somewhere. We also recommended the addition of a new position called Fleet Analyst. This position, as I mentioned earlier, would be someone in a position that would support the fleet operation, that could run the KPIs or key performance indicators, that would be able to do predictive analysis and predictive component failures, and actually look at the data and help the fleet organization make data-driven decisions, which really currently is not being done at this time. This person would also be the primary support for the Fleet Management Information System, or the FMIS. Obviously, we recommend that the 2 vacant positions be filled as soon as possible, and then in order to support the entire workload for the city assets, an additional fleet maintenance technician would be required. The other thing that we've done is we've recommended a more updated tiering structure for the fleet technicians' titles. So we like to see Fleet Technician 1, Fleet Technician 2, and Fleet Technician 3 based on skill levels and expertise and certifications. And we think it's very important for there to be some type of career advancement opportunities for fleet technicians. You know, one of the issues that we're finding in our industry right now is the lack of qualified and experienced technicians. This is not unique to the city of Wausau. This is happening throughout the industry. There's a need for about 750 new fleet technicians every year due to expanded fleet growth, due to retirements, due to people leaving the industry. And when you're competing for them, the organization really has to have something to offer. And so career advancement, position mobility is very important to technicians nowadays. We've talked about these organizational recommendations. The next issue, and probably the second biggest issue and need for the city at this point, is to address the age of the fleet. The fleet is very old. The average age for all assets in the fleet is 10.3 years. The average age for a diverse municipal fleet such as this should be somewhere between 4 and 6 years. So you're really about twice the age that you should be. And there's so many things that happen when you have an old fleet. Obviously, maintenance and repair costs go up. Reliability of the fleet goes down. Organizations tend to keep additional vehicles and pieces of units in the fleet because of the poor reliability of their frontline units. The vehicles are in the shop a lot more because of unscheduled repairs, so there's really a need for additional spares and backups. So fleet age is a real issue. Oops, wrong way. So this is the economic theory of fleet replacement. Most people are familiar with this, so we'll go through it pretty quickly. But on the vertical axis is cost, and on the horizontal axis is what we consider replacement cycle in years. So the capital cost of any asset that you buy, a vehicle or piece of equipment, is high initially when you purchase it. You know, what do they say? It loses value the day you drive it off the lot. It's absolutely true. And it drops considerably in the first couple of years of ownership. And then it tends to flatten out over the longer you have that asset in your possession. Conversely, your operating costs begin to increase. So the longer you own and operate an asset, the higher the maintenance, repair costs, and other operating costs. One interesting thing to note is that we all expect an older vehicle to have more breakdowns, to have more issues. You're going to spend more money maintaining it. But the other interesting thing when we talk about operating costs, we're also talking about fuel costs. Most assets lose about 1% of fuel efficiency every year. So every year that you maintain this asset in the fleet, you're losing about 1% of fuel economy. So again, your fuel costs are going to go up to the extent you don't have electric vehicles, but they will continue to rise. So what we really look at is we look at the total cost of ownership. And really what you have is almost this salad bowl type shape for the total cost of ownership, where the cost is high, it's decreased over a while, it flattens out a little bit, and then it increases. So the question, probably one of the most frequent questions that us as fleet consultants get is, at what point in time should we replace an asset? Well, the time is at the lowest point of cost of ownership. So what you want to do is you want to replace that right before you have that large, big breakdown, right? You're always trying to predict when that's going to happen. We do that by a task we call optimum replacement cycle analysis. We use an ORCA tool that we can identify for specific classes of vehicles what that point is. So with 116 different classes of vehicles and equipment in the city's fleet, you're going to have 116 different planning parameters for replacement cycles for your equipment. Now, some of them are going to be the same. You know, a light-duty pickup truck, you know, a quarter-ton compact pickup truck and a half-ton pickup truck used in standard operating practices is probably going to be about the same. However, you know, a sedan used in law enforcement is going to have a much different replacement cycle than a sedan used in general transportation purposes. So that was the economic theory. I think, you know, it's hard to argue with the theory, but what I like to do is put actual data to that stuff. Now, we were not able to get the data out of the current fleet management information system to do this for your fleet, but this is a fleet we did recently for another city organization. A little bit larger fleet, it had about 800 assets. But again, on the left side is cost. On the right, on the horizontal axis, instead of age, we're using mileage. So each one of these diamonds represent a data point for an asset in the fleet for a specific class of vehicle. And as you can see, over time, costs really do go up. I mean, it's not just theory. This is what actually happens when you own and operate a vehicle, provided that the usage continues at about the same rate as the vehicle ages. So we did what we consider a replacement analysis for the city of Wausau fleet. I know it's kind of hard to read, but essentially we removed the small engine equipment from the analysis and any of the small things that were, you know, $2,500 and less. These are really capital equipment and vehicles that are included in the replacements analysis. So there are 366 assets included in this analysis. The gross replacement cost of the fleet, that is, if you replaced everything today, would be $27.7 million. So it's a considerable investment that the city's made in the fleet. The average gross replacement cost per asset in the fleet is just over $75,000, which means you have a lot of high dollar items in your fleet. You're obviously the ones that stick out are the fire apparatus are very expensive, but the other ones, the snowplow trucks, the yellow iron, the street sweepers, those are very expensive pieces of equipment. The average age of the fleet in this analysis is even greater than the average age that we talked about a little bit ago. It's at 12.4 years. And we developed the replacement plan using the city's current replacement parameters or replacement cycles. And using those, the target average replacement cycle is 11 years. So if you take half of that number, 50% of the target average replacement cycle, you can get what the average age of the fleet should be to meet that. So the average target age of the city of Wausau fleet should be around 5.5 years, which is what we would expect it to be. However, as you can see, the average age of this portion of the fleet is more than twice that. So again, a very old fleet. The average annual replacement requirement or the average annual spend, if you were maintaining this target replacement cycle, would be about $2.5 million a year is what you would need to fund this replacement plan. The average annual replacement spend over the last 3 years has been closer to $1.8 million, so quite a bit shy of what the target should be. And so the underfunding over the last, several years has resulted in a large backlog of fleet replacement needs. So on this slide, what we do is we actually develop what we call our baseline fleet replacement plan. And so this is all 366 assets in the replacement analysis and project when they're going to be replaced over a 20-year period. So some assets, like a flatbed lowboy trailer, might be replaced once in a 20-year planning period. Some of the law enforcement police vehicles might be replaced every 4 years, so it would show up several times in this plan. So what we've done is we've projected and simulated when each one of these assets should be replaced over that 20-year planning period. And what you can see is somewhat alarming. There's about just shy of a $14 million backlog of fleet replacement needs because of the underfunding of replacement of vehicles and equipment over the years. And then the other thing that is interesting is the peaks and valleys that you can see. Obviously, there's a lot, you guys deal with finances and budgets, probably daily, and most people in the finance world do not like the peaks and valleys and the volatility of something like this. And we would never, ever come here and recommend that you replace 40% of your fleet in 1 year. It's just not going to happen. Not only would it be costly to do, but guess what? In another 10, 12 years, you're going to have another peak spike, and it would require that again. And there's no way the people in the fleet organization could logistically do that. There is no way you could replace that many vehicles and pieces of equipment in a year. So what we do next is we actually smooth the plan. So what we try to do is develop a plan that is more smooth, that is predictable, that is easier to plan for the next several years. And we do this by deferring a lot of those assets that were in that peak or that backlog in the first year. So some of them were deferred a year, some of them were deferred 2 years, some deferred 3 and 4 years. And again, our replacement planning software is called CARCAP, and CARCAP does this for us based on age and utilization statistics of the fleet. So it will look at it and say, okay, this one's older than this one, so this one should be deferred. This one should be deferred 1 year versus 2 years, and so forth. So that's what we've done. We've actually smoothed out the first 10 years of the plan. And again, from a finance and budget perspective, this is a lot easier to plan for and to look forward to, and it's easier for a fleet organization to plan on a regular basis. So what we would recommend is that the city actually adopt a somewhat smooth plan. This smooth plan averages about $3.5 million of replacement spend a year. And the interesting thing about this is if you take a look at the impact of average fleet age by spending an average of $3.3 million over the next several years, you can see that the average fleet age drops from just over 12 years in the first year or current year to under 6 years in about 4 years' time. So now you're hitting that, range of 4 to 6 years, and you're hitting it pretty quickly. So that's what's important. So we've talked about this. The goal is really to hit that average age of all fleet assets between 4 and 6 years. Organizations really have three alternatives to finance and fund their fleet replacement. One is using cash on an ad hoc basis. Every year you just simply budget for and allocate cash to fleet replacements. The other is developing a fleet replacement reserve fund, which is closer to what you guys do, where you actually develop a savings account from charges to the customer units, where their charges come into a fleet replacement reserve fund. You accumulate money over time for that asset, so you're paying into the fund for 10 years of that asset's useful life, and at the end of the 10 years or the end of the useful life, you have money there to purchase a new one or replace that one. So that is what you're kind of doing now. However, not always is there enough money to replace that. And then new additions to the fleet, and I think this is very important, really should be paid for with new budget requests. It shouldn't be paid out of the reserve fund. So if I'm a department, if I have 10 vehicles and we're going to change our mission, we're going to add new services, and we need another vehicle, that vehicle should be paid for with other budget request money, not out of the reserve fund, because if you take it out of the reserve fund, then some other vehicle is not going to have the accumulated cash later down the road to be replaced. Same way with changing vehicles. If you're going to go from a compact pickup truck for whatever activity is that costs $25,000, and you want a one-ton crew cab vehicle with utility bed that's going to cost double that, then that additional capital should come from a budget request as opposed to from the reserve fund. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
Okay, now I get to talk a little bit here. What I found out, I was in the parts department, and it looks like the parts management could improve. The technicians, they have to source their own parts and pick in their own parts. This is part of why they're only a 3.5 wrench turning operation, because they are spending time looking up parts, calling vendors, and sourcing the parts. The parts room is not sized adequately, and it is too small. The parts clerk is really like an inventory inventory specialist. Fleet really needs a parts manager, someone that is familiar with sourcing, understands what parts are, and understands vehicles. Parts are not being posted immediately to work orders. So what's happening is the technicians go in the parts room, they get their parts, they fill out a parts card, and they put it in a box. A couple times a day, the inventory specialist collects those and puts them into the work order. So they're not hitting the work orders immediately. Another problem I found was parts warranties are not formally tracked. The information system isn't tracking parts warranties. What has to happen is the technician or they're relying on the technician to remember, hey, I put a part on that not too long ago. Or if they're not sure, they have to go back into work order history and actually look up and see if the part was actually put on previously. And that takes quite a bit of time, and it's taken them away from their wrench turning time. We did run a customer survey, or a customer satisfaction survey, and there was some problems that arose in that. One of the things, the customers don't feel they're getting their vehicles back in a timely manner. That's not just from the shop, because the shop also sends a lot of vehicles out for commercial repairs. And those are taking a considerable amount of time to get back as well. We already talked about the age of the fleet. That's not helping the situation either. Customers feel their fleets are too old, and they would like to see the replacement. The replacement parameters picked up quite a bit. They also mentioned about work quality. They're not saying that the vehicle is going back to the shop for the same problem. What they're saying is the vehicles are going to the shop with a laundry list, but fleet is so overwhelmed, they don't have time to fix everything on that request. They're fixing what's important, the safety items, but there's some of those smaller items that may not be getting fixed, and the customers were concerned about that as well. Communication needs to improve a little bit. It was reported that if a customer needs some information from fleet, they have to call fleet to get the information. Fleet's not providing it back the other way, which I mean is as work orders status change, they're not letting the customer know that, hey, this is going to take a little bit longer than usual. It's not a proactive operation. There's no service level agreements. Service level agreements are really good because what they do is they define the responsibilities not only for the fleet personnel, but they also what's expected from the customers. So everybody knows exactly what's expected of them. This here is a graph of the questions I asked and the responses from the departments. We like to see the score right around 4. This is on a scale of 1 to 5. They came in at 2.8, which was kind of low. But if you can look at that, there are some areas that they scored well over, like the rework. They did really well. They're up over 3. Emergency response, nobody had an issue with emergency response. So they are responding to customers' needs. It just needs some improvement. I spent a lot of time looking at the performance measures, and they're not being reported. I shouldn't say that not being reported at all. They're doing a good job of reporting on some of the metrics, but the data in the fleet information system seems kind of sketchy and not easily drawn out so they can really look at what the key performance indicators are, which leads to the FMIS is not optimal. They're running a system that is not considered a tier 1 system. I mean, it does basically have some functionalities to manage a fleet, but it's deficient. It was also reported that they're not getting much training on the FMIS. So that's a problem as well. The system's not tracking warranties. That would be, in-house warranties, parts warranties, commercial vendor warranties, or manufacturer's warranties as well. The staff's not really trained on ad hoc reports. They do go in there and they run reports, but they have to fumble around and it's not easily produced. They don't have an e-request module for customers to request work orders online. Customers don't have read-only access to the system either. This would be handy if the customer can go in, look at work order history, check on status of their vehicles that are in the shop or out at the vendor. This table shows some performance measures, what the description is. I'm not going to read through all of them, and what we considered a target goal for each of these performance measures. And as you can see, there's some up there that we weren't able to get the information for. But as you can see, the ones I did get information for, minus PM compliance, they're well within the standards. And I do want to point out this, that their technician productivity is really good. We have a goal of 70%. The fleet technicians down in the shop, they produced almost 71%. We also looked at the facilities. The facilities is deficient as well. They just don't have enough maintenance bays. They have 4 maintenance and repair bays and 2 PM bays. Based on the manning that we're suggesting, they're going to need 12 maintenance and repair bays, a welding bay, and a machine shop area. The bay sizes aren't appropriate. The heavy equipment bays are only 18 feet. We're suggesting that they be 24 feet. I know a vehicle's not 18 feet wide, but the thing is, we have to look at working around that vehicle. There's just not enough room for toolboxes, equipment, for them to perform their duties. The parts room is also too small. The parts clerk isn't even located inside the parts room. She's in an office just outside of the parts room. So that needs to be addressed as well. The fleet manager and the shop supervisor share a workspace. The configuration and layout is poor. It's just not optimal.
So one of the other things that we were asked to do was to actually take a look at the work that another A&E firm had done to develop a space allocation plan and layout for the new shop. And again, like I've mentioned, we are fleet professionals. This is what we do every single day. We do a lot of fleet maintenance facility programming. And so what we did is just try to help and identify some areas that could be either repositioned or changed or thought differently about based on our actual operation within a shop. Some of them are very minor. You'll see the arrows at the bottom of the chart are circled. So what the architect has depicted here is that vehicles will enter from the top of the shop and exit at the bottom of the shop. We all know from our experience that's not what happens. They enter from both sides, so it's really a drive-in from both sides, back out configuration. And again, it's not that important when you just look at this because you know obviously you just turn the little icon around, but when we look at the site plan, you'll see why that's a major issue. There's other little things. The location of the break room, the location of the restrooms, the size of the restrooms, the location of the locker room, the positioning of the field applications storage area, which is not even a fleet activity. Little things like the fluid distribution room and the tool and equipment storage room should be flipped. The mechanics are going to be accessing the tool and equipment storage room. They're not going to be accessing the fluid distribution storage room. So you want to put that space in closer adjacency to the shop floor to reduce the number of steps. There's small things like, and we always support a use of a mezzanine for storage of bulky items, for storage of slow-moving parts. However, that mezzanine should also be managed by the parts operation. And here, as you can see, the access to the mezzanine is in a stairwell that is outside of the parts room. So it's an open, I'm sure you could put a lock on it and a door on it, but right now the access is open. The way the parts room is configured, the mechanics would actually enter into the parts room to get the parts, for even if there's a parts clerk sitting there. Again, all you do is turn that parts counter around, put a roll-up door on a counter. The technician never has to enter the warehouse space. So there's a lot of smaller issues. The bigger issues are there's about 10 bays programmed here. Really, we need about 14, including the weld fabrication and the machine shop. A little bit bigger concern is the circulation on the site. So this phase one was the construction of a new fleet maintenance shop. Phase two was the new parking garage, and phase three was the crew and administration area and parking garage. And as you can see towards the bottom of the repair garage, where I mentioned where those arrows are coming out, is going to be the same area, and I don't think my pointer works that far, but So basically what you'll have is you'll have vehicles entering into the Phase 2 parking garage from the bottom of the slide, and then vehicles entering and exiting the repair garage at the same time possibly. So really the configuration is not optimal. I know they were limited on the site, so there's not many options available. However, you're going to have one opportunity in a generation to build a new fleet maintenance shop, and really think that, maybe this isn't the right location for that shop. Maybe there's other areas that could be identified for a shop where we could actually build a shop and have the site circulation around that would be adequate for not only today's fleet, but tomorrow's fleet and the fleet into the future. One of the things that we look at when we look at programming a fleet maintenance facility is not only the interior space allocations and adjacencies, but also the exterior site. So, and again, based on certain performance metrics like fleet availability, fleet downtime, repair turnaround times, we program space for ready line and deadline. So the deadline is vehicles that are brought to the shop and are waiting induction into the shop for maintenance activity or repair activity. The ready line is when the vehicles have been completed and they're ready to be released to the customer. Now, in something like this, sure, the mechanics could release the vehicle and park them back in the garage. However, you really don't want to be paying a mechanic to shuttle vehicles around the site. And the other thing is you need exterior staging place for vehicle staging for in-servicing vehicles, for decommissioning vehicles, for staging vehicles that are getting ready to go to auction, for staging vehicles that are just being received into the fleet. So with all this new construction on this site, circulation in and around the site is going to be very tight. And the tighter the circulation, that's when accidents happen. So again, just something to think about as we move forward with the plans to look at constructing a new fleet maintenance facility. The other thing we looked at was the chargeback rate structure. The current chargeback rates is really a cost per mile. It's based on historical averages of maintenance and repair multiplied by the number of miles driven. So it's not unusual to use this type of rate structure. FEMA uses a very similar rate structure, or a lot of project costing is done by cost per hour for a piece of equipment or a vehicle, so you can charge those costs to a specific project or activity. However, when it comes to fleet chargebacks, what we really like is a service-based chargeback approach. A service-based chargeback approach is something that everyone here is probably more familiar with. It's what your dealership charges you. When you take your vehicle into a commercial dealership, you're charged an hourly labor rate for the labor that's performed on your vehicle. You're charged for the parts that are consumed. You're charged markups for the parts management. If they have to sublet that work to another company, you're charged for sublet work. You're charged a markup on that. And then there's generally other fees associated with that. So we think a service-based chargeback approach is superior for a number of different reasons. One is it has a greater chance to impact behavior of a department or a user if they know that, if I take care of my vehicle, my maintenance repair costs are going to be low. But if I don't take care of it, if I'm running up curbs all the time and I'm blowing tires and I'm damaging wheels, that's going to cost me a lot more money, so I'm going to pay my fair share. The current way it is developed now, it's all based on history, so it's really not impacting behavior because you don't see the impact of those costs until the next year or the year after that. The other thing is we like service-based chargeback rates because it's easy to compare to the commercial sector. Everyone always says, how do we compare to the private sector? Well, if you use service-based chargeback rates, you'll know immediately how you compare, because you can look at your fully burdened hourly labor rate and compare it to what the dealership's charging or to what another shop is charging down the road. So we think there's opportunity for improvement when it comes to the way the chargeback rates are designed and implemented. The other thing we looked at was fleet utilization. Now, the utilization of a fleet asset is generally looked at in miles driven or engine hours operated. And it's looked at on an annual basis during the budget process. Every time they develop a fleet replacement plan, they are looking at how many miles this unit has on it, how many engine hours is on this unit, which is good. But what we like to do is we like to look at this at a more wholesome level. So we started looking at it based on classes of vehicles. So each one of these groups represent a unique class of vehicle, And as you would expect, the LE stand for law enforcement. So the law enforcement SUVs, the law enforcement sedans are being driven quite a bit. The sedans are dropping off because obviously the patrol vehicles are now moving to SUVs. Sedans are more for the leadership roles within the department and detective vehicles and investigation vehicles and even some backup patrol vehicles. So we started looking at that, and what we've looked at and what we were able to find and identify was these box and whisker graphs become quite large. So the upper level utilization is pretty good. So there's some vehicles that are being highly utilized and driven a lot. However, there's appears to be a lot of vehicles that are not being driven as much. So we took that a step further. So we, again, using the same vehicle classifications, we looked at how many of these assets were driven on average less than 5,000 miles a year. And again, 5,000 miles a year is a kind of an industry standard point of departure from where you start looking at vehicles. And so what we did is we identified 26 vehicles in these various classifications, average less than 5,000 miles per year. Now, we're not saying the city could go out and eliminate these 26 vehicles, and we're not saying they should look strictly at mileage either. When we look at fleet utilization, you have to look at, in addition to vehicle utilization, which could be engine hours, which could be miles, which could be hubometers, but you really need to look at mission criticality of the unit. So, you might have a very critical unit that is simply not being used very much. The police department might have an armored vehicle, and you know what? You hope that's not being used, right? So it would have very low mileage, you would hope. But it's not something that's readily available. You can't go out to United Rental and rent a armored Bearcat that the police department can use when they get a hostage situation or something like that. So there are some one-off units that you're going to have regardless. Fire apparatus, they're probably not getting a ton of miles driven on them, but you need them. So what we like to do is we like to look at utilization and criticality and mission criticality, as well as what are the alternatives to owning this asset. If it's a standard minivan, there are opportunities to rent that all day, right? You probably, within 2 miles of here, you could probably rent a minivan, or we passed an enterprise rental place on the way here tonight. So there's an opportunity to rent standard transportation type vehicles. So, the other thing is the assignment of practices of the city. Right now, vehicles are assigned to a department. And if it's in this department, there's very little sharing across departments. So when we talked about motor pool earlier, motor pool means there's a central pool of vehicles that can be used by anybody. Now, we're not saying all vehicles should be in that pool, because if someone's using that vehicle 4 days a week, that vehicle should be assigned to that department and maybe even to an individual. However, what we're saying is there's a lot of vehicles probably on the fringe that, this department's using it about 2,500 miles a year. This department's using it 2,500 miles a year. This department needs it for 500 miles a year. Instead of having 3 vehicles, we could do that with 1 vehicle. And then any overflow demand could be met with commercial vendors. So we're just saying there's an opportunity, more than likely, to reduce the size of the fleet. The other issue that comes in play, and I mentioned it earlier, is the fact that as you have an old fleet, more and more departments and customers are more likely to retain additional spares and backups. If they're not confident that the vehicle is going to be reliable for that job that they have to do the next day, they're probably going to have a backup just in case. So in conclusion, the good news, there are experienced fleet professionals that work for the city of Wausau. We are very impressed with their knowledge and understanding of the basic principles of managing and maintaining a fleet. The technicians are very skilled. Some of them have ASC certifications. One of them was actually an EVT certified technician, which is excellent. Many of the foundational elements are in place. I mentioned fleet policies and procedures. Generally, that's an area that is woefully inadequate in most government organizations, but there's been a lot of work done in that area. The one recommendation we had on the fleet policies and SOPs is they're not all in one central location. I can't go to the City of Wausau website and find a fleet management handbook with everything. I can go and find all of these different policies and procedures exist, but it would be difficult for me as a customer, as a user, to find everything in one place. And I mentioned the PM program, the design of it is good. needs some work on the execution. There's good use of commercial vendors. They understand that commercial vendors are needed for specialty repairs and overflow work, and they're using them right now to help respond to the shortage in resources. Costs are reasonable. One of the things that we like to look at is your cost per VEU. We do a lot of work where organizations are considering outsourcing this function. It's one of the few municipal government type activities that can readily be outsourced to commercial providers in a number of different ways. I mean, you can hire a company to come in and occupy your space and do the work in your facility, or you can hire a network of vendors and, use Bob's shop down here and Maria's shop over here and Scott's shop down there. So there's a lot of different ways, and we know what those costs are because we do a lot of these studies. Your cost per VEU at about $1,800 per VEU is competitive. So the good news is your costs are competitive. And the other good news is you guys are steps ahead when it comes to a fleet maintenance facility. There's already been some level of agreement that is needed. There's been plans developed, I think a few tweaks on the existing plans, and you'd be right there. Other opportunities for improvement, obviously the first thing that we would do is fill those positions. Not only fill the vacant positions, but add the couple of positions that we recommended. Obviously the technician positions are more important than the analyst position, but that position is important as well. Renew the fleet, improve customer relationships, improve the use of the current FMIS, and again, FMIS, the Fleet Management Information System. Use information to make decisions, track and report key performance indicators, right-size the fleet, develop service-based chargeback rates. Some of these are more long-term, some of these are very tactical. Within our report, we had a number of what we call tactical recommendations that could be improved, put into place and improved tomorrow. Some of them are long-term, but there's a lot of things that, small things, little steps can improve things. We talked about developing key performance indicators and being proactive and pushing that information out to our customers. So in the budget document, there's always a list of accomplishments for the departments and stuff, and that's great. That's a good start. We like to, and that's kind of what we consider that a state of the fleet report. An annual state of the fleet report is very good to not only give to the governing body, but also to the department managers and the customer groups. Let them know how you've been doing. Let them know the challenges you faced. Let them know any new initiatives that are on the horizon. So it's really important to communicate proactively with the client. Little things like put in place, if like Scott mentioned, you brought it in here for a PM, you expected it back at the end of the day, but you know what, we found a major issue, it's going to be 3 days now. Pick up the phones, send them a text, shoot them an email, let the customer know that there's going to be a delay. So just improving communication is something that can be, and I believe it's already started. So those are things that can be done today. Within the fleet organization, there are hundreds of metrics and performance areas that you can measure and report on. We've identified about 10 or 12 that we really think is a good place to start. Those are the key ones. Those are the things that the customers are most worried about and interested in. So start tracking that, start providing that information out. The other thing I'd mentioned about performance and benchmarking is that, it's more important to benchmark yourself against internal performance over time. So I'm more interested in finding out what you guys are doing next year at this time than comparing you to, is it Marathon County? Marathon County, their fleet shop. They do things a different way. They have different requirements and stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily compare you to other peers necessarily, but compare yourself to industry standards and compare your performance over time to your internal performance. To help identify the implementation of some of these, we developed a formal implementation plan. And what we do is we look at the implementation of activities and try to help you identify what should be your priorities. We do this by using 4 different criteria. One is the impact of implementing the action item. One is the importance of implementing the action item. One is the complexity, how difficult is it going to be, and then one is the cost. So we give all these a score, we weight them, and then we're able to identify a total priority score. We've also provided an estimated time to implement. That is once the recommendation is initiated, how long it should take, the primary person who should be responsible, and some secondary people. So that's really what we had planned for today. We did go a little bit long, sorry. But any questions, comments, concerns?
Committee members, any questions? Deb, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm not sure if I've been buying used vehicles I've only bought one new vehicle in my life, and that was back in my 20s. Otherwise, I have found that I haven't had to replace one engine, only one tranny ever in driving since the 70s. So I guess I go by monitoring and working with my mechanic that doesn't have any up costs in addition to his service, and we do have some really reasonable shops. But you're saying within our existing system, we are not tracking by mileage or by the vehicle number, say for recalls or for warranty and that?
Yeah, no, you are. You are tracking mileage, you are tracking cost by asset number. What is not being tracked is necessarily warranty. So a fleet management information system, when properly configured and implemented, should be able to flag an issue. So if you replaced a battery in a vehicle and 60 days later you have a battery issue or an electrical issue, when you enter that task code, so most systems use a VMRS task code, which identifies the activity and the component that you're making a repair to. It'll say replace battery or diagnose battery or check battery. And when you identify that VMRS code in the system, that it will automatically flag, because it will look back, because you put in warranty parameters. It'll look back 90 days. It'll look back however many days you put the warranty in, and it will flag you on the system. Possible warranty issue. Right now, the system that they're using does not have that capability, and it's not set up that way.
Okay, it just happens for my most recent vehicle. I ended up going to Stevens Point, and based on the vehicle number, they looked up the past service, so I was able to get copies of that, and I like to track that as well.
Correct.
I don't know if this is something you've done an analysis in other organizations or not, but back in the 2000s, Madison had gone to totally propane on all their vehicles. So, and we have contracted for our garbage collection and recycling, where we invested with Harder's company that went totally with propane. Are you seeing any long-term advantages or disadvantages and in keeping the costs under control for fleets or certain vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, right now, you just touched on one of the hottest trends in the fleet industry, or the hottest issues, and that is alternative fueled vehicles, primarily with electric vehicles, with the new administration's push for the federal government to go electric when it comes to their passenger fleet. There's been a lot of interest in that over the years, and I was a fleet manager when the oh my gosh, what was the regulation that came out in the 80s? EPAC, help me, Mark. I can't remember what it was, but it said you must, if you were in a metropolitan statistical analysis area, you were required by federal law to purchase X number of alternative fuel vehicles every year. So the executive order said purchase vehicles. It didn't say you had to use the alternative fuel. So people were buying bi-fuel vehicles, a vehicle that you could use natural gas or you could use gasoline, and or EA5, and so people just weren't using the alternative fuel. Oh. Later on, about 10 years, 7 to 10 years later, the federal government changed that and said, no, you must use the fuel and meet the intent of the regulation. However, now there's a huge push for hybrid electric vehicles and electric vehicles. Propane is really, unless you're using a forklift fleet or something like that, or maybe a lawnmower fleet, propane is not a very widely accepted alternative fuel right now. CNG is still used quite a bit, especially for vehicles that have specific routes and distances. So transit fleets use a lot of CNG. Refuse fleets use a lot of CNG. When it gets beyond that, not a whole lot of organizations are using CNG. So really, I think what we're recommending most organizations do, well, two things, and it really depends on what the goal is. We have worked with some organizations that say we want to go alternative fuel because we think it's the right thing to do for the environment, regardless of cost, regardless of fuel consumption, regardless of anything. We want to do it for branding purposes, for what it looks like to our consumers. That's what our consumers want. So there's other reasons to do that. If you simply want to reduce your fuel costs, if you want to reduce emissions, then you can do it by renewing your fleet. I mentioned that vehicles lose about 1% fuel efficiency every year. So just by renewing your fleet, you can reduce fuel consumption, you can reduce emissions. So there's ways to do it by not really reconfiguring your entire fleet. The other thing that many fleet organizations, especially municipal government organizations, have had great success with is hybrid vehicles. A standard hybrid vehicle requires no additional infrastructure. The same mechanic that is working on the ICE engine can work on a hybrid engine as long as it's not the battery. So, and it's really seamless to a driver or operator. So hybrid electric vehicles are a great resource. Electric vehicles is where most people are at least looking to go right now. However, the infrastructure is not there for people that don't have a specific route mentality. So if you're on a food delivery program and we're going to drive this many miles a day, electric vehicle might be the right vehicle for you. However, you need to invest in the charging infrastructure. You're going to have to invest in the charging infrastructure where the vehicles are stored. If you plan on taking a vehicle out of town for a conference or meetings with other governing boards, then you have to start looking online and saying, okay, where's the charging stations? And plan your route according to distance and charging stations. It's not like a gas station where you can find 100 gas stations along the highway. So there are some difficulties in that. We definitely support organizations developing some type of fleet sustainability plan. One organization is going completely away from diesel, because they think that even gasoline's a cleaner burning fuel than diesel. And so they're getting rid of diesel vehicles. It's hard to do when you start talking about yellow iron and heavy-duty trucks. However, Scott in his research recently found out Case is making their 580 series backhoe all electric. So there are electric motorcycles out there now.
Well, that's good, and
Yeah.
and I guess Volkswagen and Volvo have been known to have, the diesel engines, at least on sedans, last 500,000 miles or more.
Right.
I guess for our city, there is a number of riding around, and the city is really not that large compared to other metro areas. And we have had a number of auto shops that were dealers that have grown in size, and some of them have ended up selling their previous smaller facilities. Some have been converted into like Habitat stores, or some are empty and available. So is there any point of, say, for some of these smaller shops that might have additional acreage for having some additions put on it or additional parking to be using, say, for sedans or other automobiles that aren't overly large as a way to be able to service on one side of the city or the other, instead of being kind of landlocked where we were planning on the public works, but because of the upstates in what we're doing project water and sewer wise, we're kind of landlocked. So have you seen that in other communities?
Sure, absolutely. And with the size of the workload here, I would, and geographically, I don't know if it makes sense to have more than one shop, but I would certainly look at other alternative sites for a shop. We have no problem with reusing an existing facility if it can be used. Generally, the biggest concern for us is unobstructed overhead clearance. So in a light-duty shop, we really never program anything less than 18 feet of unobstructed clearance, overhead clearance, because you really want the vehicles to be able to be put on a lift and raised, and mechanics off the floor as much as possible. Heavy-duty shop, we're going to need, especially with your heavy-duty fleet, we're going to probably need 30 to 32 feet of unobstructed overhead clearance. So we have no problem repurposing existing facilities if you can find one. We did a real nice fleet shop for a county fire department in Maryland where It was a warehouse. We converted an empty warehouse into a beautiful fleet shop.
Okay, thank
Just a
you.
couple additional questions here. So back to your analysis of the use and the management of the FMIS technology. In your review, is that FMIS system a common off-the-shelf vendor-type software product, or is that an in-house system that they had created that they've been maintaining?
No, it's an off-the-shelf program.
Right.
Okay.
And it's a very common system. You know, they're housed out of the Chicago area, so it's somewhat local. It's very common. It's a lower price system, and it has, like we met, basic functionality. It's not the best system in the world. It's not the worst system in the world. The problem with the system right now is you're either going to have to make a commitment to that system, and I don't want to say reconfigure the whole thing and re-implement it, but it's going to take a lot of work going through, cleaning it up, and then upgrading it, adding the modules. There's a couple other modules that needed to be added to really make it user-friendly. And then the other problem is you really need to start retraining from day one. And it's not just training for one or two people. It's everybody in the fleet organization. And then once it's up and running, customers have read access rights. Then they need to be trained on how to use it as well. But if you're going to do that, then, you know, at some point, do you consider maybe
An upgrade?
An upgrade.
Well, and that was my thought is, you know, whether the software itself is woefully inadequate or whether it was, that it was not used to its fullest potential, and whether there is, you know, hope for that or whether it's a do-over. So that's helpful. Thank you
Good.
for that. The other question I have is I started to look at your analysis of technician pay comparison when we were in the context of competition for skilled technicians. And, you know, knowing that the facility is obviously a key issue for attracting and retaining quality workforce, I also believe that the workplace culture is key to that as well. But I looked at some of your comparisons, at least municipal comparisons, and from a raw salary standpoint, we aren't that far off with our municipal competitors. I think where we run into trouble is competing with the private sector, because now Wisconsin's policy on benefits and things has changed to the point where, you know, I will say prior to that, people were willing to earn a little less because the benefit package was second to none. After the advent of those changes, the private sector's benefits and ours aren't that much different. And so you find that you're competing on raw wages more than ever before. And so, you know, that said, I think that it's worth our time, and I guess I look for your insight as to whether you think it's worth our time, even within our current salary range, to do an analysis, you know, not another wage study, because we just did that, but an analysis of an employee's progression from beginning to midpoint and midpoint to maximum, and determine if, to compete with the private sector, there's a way to accelerate that progression to retain.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, well, I've got a couple of thoughts running around in my head, but yes, absolutely. Because the problem with, and I worked in city government for a dozen years, so the issue that we always had was the fact that I have to be here a year to earn a step. I have to be here a year to earn a step. You know, every once in a while, we would have some money for performance incentives and raises and things like that. What we really need nowadays, even in municipal settings, is we need a very strong performance-based compensation and raise in bonuses, whatever it is, in order to not only attract these people but retain them. You know, I came from an era, I'm old like Scott, where loyalty was huge. I mean, I got in an organization, I thought I was going to retire from the city. And I've been with the same group I've been with now for 20 years almost. So, but nowadays, people jump ship quickly. They will jump it for 50 cents an hour more down the street if they think they don't care about PTO, they don't care about losing vacation days, they don't care about loyalty to an organization. What they're looking for is the immediate gratification. And there's been a bunch of studies out on millennials and Generation X and what's the new Generation Y and Z, how, well, it's corporate culture, it's all this cultural stuff. You know, they want nap rooms and they want, you know, cocoons to go lay out in. True to some degree, it's all based on compensation still. If you get down and talk to technicians like we do, the number one reason that they leave a job is for more money somewhere else, or because the conditions that they're working in is unacceptable, whether that be management styles, whether it be physical conditions of the shop. The other thing to consider, and you're at the right point to consider it, is one of the fleet programs that we did, they actually air conditioned the shop to help attract and retain employees. So, generally the shop is the only space in the facility that is not air conditioned. The administrative offices are, the employee amenities are, the parts room should be, the parts warehouse should be. All those areas are conditioned anyway, and the shop's never conditioned. Now, it's hot out there today. It's been warm. It gets warm in Wisconsin. So again, something else to consider when you're building that shop is if we really want to attract and retain these mechanics, if they're thinking about going to a shop down the road and, is that 25 cents an hour worth leaving an air-conditioned shop? Probably not.
Well, and that's, I think, the discussion that we need to have, I guess, introspectively as a council and as a number of committees. We've got an HR committee, we've got this committee, we've got a capital projects committee that's going to be looking at this plan again in July. And so, I think throughout that process, it helps us to take a wholesale look, because if you invest millions of dollars in a new facility and then find out that the culture inside of it is toxic, that new facility isn't going to save it. And, I certainly don't want us to be, and I've said before, I don't want us to be in the business of training other people's snowplow drivers and other people's, everything, because you invest an awful lot of time, money in those folks, and if they hang around for a year and can't get what they need or want, and then, suddenly are plowing snow 15 miles down the street for more money, that's huge for us, and it's a huge loss. So I appreciate the comparison. Even though we just completed a wage study, I think that's something that we have to be mindful of as well, because it's not just about the bricks and mortars. So
Right.
thank you for that. Committee members, any additional questions? Deb?
Yes. I was going to ask, for some of these standard vehicles, instead of purchasing, can't the city, if we're looking at some vehicles that have low mileage and you're expecting a turnover of, say, 5 to 6 years, can't the city just look at leasing?
Sure, absolutely. And the city has. There's
We are leasing
50,
quite a few.
about 50 vehicles or light-duty vehicles are being leased right now. And we have no problem with that. It's a way to renew the fleet on a accelerated approach. So we have no problem with that. The only problem that we would say when you're leasing vehicles like that, so the FMCs, the fleet management companies that most people traditionally lease from, they offer a ton of other services. So like the pharmaceutical salespeople, they don't have a shop. They don't have an in-house shop. So they need someone to manage vehicle acquisition, manage maintenance repair, manage the driver, safety and accident reviews. So they need the management of the fleet. So they're hiring that service as well. Right now, the city doesn't need those additional services. They just need the lease. So, when you look at a lease versus just debt, sometimes debt can be a little cheaper as opposed to a lease. A lease is a little cleaner. It's a little easier to actually implement and manage. But there's a little bit higher cost of money when you lease. But, hey, we're all for it.
Well, and that was one of the benchmarks of the study, was to determine first if we were wise to continue leasing and if we were doing not enough or too much of that activity. I guess, can you just touch on briefly, and I know you don't have slides for that part of the study, but where did we come out on that? Are we adequate, short, or overdoing it on the lease part?
No, I think you're fine. In fact, we have 2 people on our staff that came from the fleet management companies that actually work for us now. So they were able to take a look at and you guys did a good job. You went out and used a cooperative bid agreement, Sourcewell, wasn't it? Sourcewell to actually piggyback on that contract for your leasing, which is good because that was competitively bid. Whenever these things are competitively bid, the cost and fees are going to be cheaper. So that was good. There's a lot of good stuff that you got. There's no markup on out-of-stock purchases. The advertising credit that the fleet management companies sometimes will or will not give you is included, which is good. There's no termination fee for equity leases, which is good. There's no interim rent, which sometimes they will make you rent a vehicle if your lease expires here and it's going to be 30 days before you get the next one. Sometimes there's a lease fee. You guys don't have that. You're not using the fuel card management, are you, from them? And you're not using the maintenance management from them, are you?
While we are having our maintenance done, we're outsourcing that basically because of the lack of technicians available.
Right.
Okay.
So are they managing that process for you too?
No.
Okay.
Could you come up so we can hear in the audience?
We'll bring up our fleet manager, Mark Hanson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we simply asked Mark if he was using the fuel card program with the FMC, and you answered.
Yeah, correct. We're not using that part of it, but we are, we do have a maintenance module within Enterprise, basically so that we can have an outside company maintain those vehicles because of the lack of technicians, but we're not paying an extra.
You're not paying the management fee for that
Correct,
activity.
yes.
Which is good. So those are all excellent points within the lease. There's a couple of little things that you didn't get. There's zero holdback, and there's zero floor plan discounts passed on to you guys, which it's generally common to get something from them for those two activities. The 10% factory and 15% dealer stock management fee is a little bit higher than we typically see when you acquire vehicles through them. And the resale rate of $395 fee is higher than average. But, you know, I mean, all in all, it's a pretty reasonable deal.
Okay. All right.
The only thing I would suggest is if you continue to lease these again, there might be an opportunity to either see if Sourcewell's got an updated agreement, or that might be something that you want to think about going out for competitive bid, because every time that we help a client do competitive bids on fleet management companies, the costs go down.
Yeah.
Because they know somebody's looking at it.
It's been a while since we started that concept, and so it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea to let people compete for it again.
Right.
So,
Right. No, the leasing program is a positive thing that the city has done.
sure. Jim, go ahead.
Well, I have all sorts of questions, but I only got 2 minutes, so.
All right.
I just had a comment about electric vehicles. The biggest problem is the plugs. They're not uniform, so.
Correct.
I guess if we went we could have, our plugs wouldn't be a problem, but if you're traveling, that could be a problem. But I was curious about law enforcement vehicles. You know, some agencies have take-home vehicles for their officers. Is that a benefit to the community, like a city, or is it cost prohibitive, or just, what's your insight on that?
Great timing. We're doing a take-home vehicle police study for a smaller city in the state of Washington, actually one of his neighbors. Generally, it's not a fleet impact. It's more of an operational impact when it comes to policing. Now, what we have found, and we've done a few studies like this, what we have found is that recruiting, retention of officers is higher when they have a take-home vehicle. They like that. From a maintenance perspective, one vehicle per officer, that officer takes ownership of that vehicle. They maintain it better, they drive it better, they clean it usually. So the maintenance costs are typically lower in a take-home vehicle program. Obviously, with the problem with the take-home vehicle program is that you almost immediately have to at least double the size of your fleet. You guys are doing what we call a hot seat, where you're using the vehicle on multiple shifts a day. So you're probably going to have to double the size of your police fleet. So that's going to be an additional cost. So down the road, the maintenance costs are going to go down as the average age of the vehicles is improved. The maintenance repair cost is going to go down because the officers are going to take better care of the vehicle. And, you know, from a police perspective, presence in the community is huge. What Scott has found, I'll let Scott talk about it, but why don't you tell them what you found in Ridgeville about
Well,
why?
and I guess while you're switching people, I guess something to think about with that is where they live. You know, if your police officers live in your community and they're visible in your community, over half of ours live in the suburbs. They live in someone else's community policed by someone else. And so the optics of that, I think, is a detractor. But I also think that the cost to upfit more and more police vehicles, the upfit cost on squad cars is god-awful. And so just to keep up with the technology, and in between, you know, you buy a new car, and all of a sudden the mounting system for the in-car computer doesn't fit anymore, or the new computer doesn't fit the old docking station, or, you know, it's in a different spot and there's no room. We bear all of those costs. And so I guess has always been a concern for me, for, you know, how stuff fits and how it works together, and that may be why some of this stuff is allowed to get a little older, because it's not cheap, but.
Yeah, so with the study I'm doing in Washington State, that I took a look at lots of things like available parking, you know, not just for the police units, but for the officers bringing their POVs to work every day. The city, I I'm working for, they have a mileage limit for take-home vehicles. They said anybody living more than 10 miles from the city limits can't take a vehicle home. So they put a lot of restrictions on their take-home program, but it's working. What about the? Oh, yeah, I forgot, yeah, he reminded me. Yeah, with the hot seating, one officer's getting off duty, so he's got to take all his stuff out of the vehicle. The new officer's taking over that vehicle, he's got to put all his stuff into that vehicle. With the take-home, that stuff's always in the vehicle. Another plus for take-home is, as soon as that officer gets in his vehicle in the morning, he's on duty. He doesn't have to come into the police station and check in. That is his office. He goes right to work. So there's really, you know, it cuts down on traffic coming into the police department as well. That guy's already working as soon as he hits the road.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of positives and negatives. As I come from law enforcement, when I started for this city a long time ago, they had 6 patrol cars.
Wow.
And what do we have now, 20? So, yeah. And we had 2 detective cars. And one of those was for the sergeant to drive around.
Well, and those cars were whatever the car dealer had available, and
Yeah.
sometimes they were a banana yellow LTD station wagon with
I drove
bubblegum
that.
machines on top.
I drove that, and
They were
we got new cars every year.
beautiful
And they were
machines.
regular sedans. But talking about your changeover, I've seen it. You know, I supervised over there. Takes guys 20 minutes to change cars. So that's 10 guys, 12 guys, 20 minutes, each guy, 2 times a day, sometimes a little more. They're not serving the community. So you take all that wages you're paying them, they're off the road. You got to calculate that into all those costs. And I agree that we should not be letting our cars sit in other communities and protecting those communities. They should be for this community. So that should be, my view would be incentive to move back to our community and live where you work. I believe everybody should live where they want, but there should be an incentive. And I know it's probably not going to happen here because it's probably cost prohibitive, that initial outlay, but it's sure something to think about.
Right, and like I mentioned, it's generally a law enforcement decision, not a fleet decision, because the costs on the fleet side is generally going to be higher.
The sheriff's office did this many years ago because they have a take-home program when they didn't pass. So what they would do is they would just kept keeping their cars, and then every time they got new cars, they just store them away. They had cars, the warranties were off on them before they put them into service because then they had enough cars.
Wow.
Yeah, so interesting how that works. But committee members, any additional questions about the fleet study? If not, we will continue to reference the fleet study in its entirety through our CIP process and through our 2022 budget discussions and through those workshops. So not only do we get to use it, but the Finance Committee and the CIP folks do. And, we invited the entire council to join us tonight, and this meeting is going to be available for them on video. So they'll be able to see it as well. And I imagine the entire study document can also be emailed to them. So we'll make sure that they all have that and have access to it to see the results. So if there's no additional questions, we'll place the presentation on file, and we've got a few additional items then on our agenda for tonight. Thank you,
Great,
gentlemen,
thank
for
you very
that.
much.
You bet. Item number 2 is the Director's Report on Public Works and the introduction of the Public Works Superintendent. Just because we always have so many things to manage on the Public Works side, Eric suggested last month that, like other department heads do for other committees, that it would be useful for us to have a Director's Report each month so he can talk to us about all of these irons he has in the fire, and we can keep track of, where those projects are at. So this is our first one, and we look forward to having that monthly. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Yeah, I just tried to highlight some of the questions that some of the committee members had from the last meeting on here regarding to pothole patching and our operations on that, if you have any specific questions, as well as some of our projects in general. That way it kind of opens up the opportunity for council members to ask questions on the operations directly without having to agendize something specifically. We have Dustin Craig here. He is our new
Come on
Public
up,
Works
Dustin.
Superintendent. So welcome, Dustin. It's great to have you in
Thank you.
this position. So if you have any specific questions for him as well, so.
He's going to be our go-to guy on all things patching, plowing, any question we ever would have sent to Rick before is going to go to Dustin now, and he's ready.
What's his background? Where are you from?
I'm from, currently I live in Rothschild. I grew up in this area. Went to Everest High School. Served in the Marine Corps from 99 to 03. Served Operation Iraqi Freedom in 03. After that, I went to college, UW-Platteville. Got my bachelor's of science down there. And then moved back up here. I've been with the city just about, I think August 1st will be 10 years for me. I started as a fleet technician, as a mechanic down the motor pool. Or sorry, shouldn't call it that anymore, I guess. And then about 2 years ago, I got promoted to fleet supervisor, working under Mark and stuff like that. And just recently took over for Rick.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Definitely. Anybody have questions for Dustin right away?
Are you sick of hearing from Pat Peckham yet?
No, I'm not.
I think I've shot you 10 emails in the last 3 weeks.
Yep, and that's okay. Right now, I'm in my learning phase, so honestly, questions from you guys are good because it gives me an opportunity to find out. I got to go find out what the answer is and get back to you. So I welcome any questions that you guys have. Feel free to get a hold of me.
I went over this afternoon, I met with Dustin, first to congratulate him on his promotion, and second to talk about any concerns that they have and, anything that, we have on the practical side. And one thing I talked about on behalf of this committee is it's often so helpful when we have good answers to give people when we get called, and when the public's expectations are realistic and managed. And so often with things like pothole patching and snow plowing, it is very helpful for us to have accurate information to give, like what priority plow routes are, and what the plow schedule looks like, and how many drivers are out there and when, and what the requirements are that they face for the maximum number of hours that they can be on the road when a storm comes through, and what their patching schedule looks like, and the difference between hot mix and cold mix and stuff like that. So when people call us with either concerns or complaints, we can give good answers without having to send that person to Dustin or having to, email him, all of us, the same exact question over and over. So we did agree that in the fall, we'll have him give a presentation to this committee. The council is willing to, or is able to watch it also, and the public is going to be able to view it on our public access broadcast of the plow process. And so before it even snows, we can talk about, challenges they face with cars parked all over and how they plow and what their timelines look like. And so he's going to work on that for us. And same thing in the spring, when the frost comes out and everybody is mindful of potholes. They put out a Facebook video a while ago about the anatomy of a pothole, because people don't realize how the streets get the way they are, and that's a natural process. So.
When is that presentation?
Well, the plow one I'd like to do in the fall before it snows, so probably October,
Well, you better hurry up.
right? And, yep, and so we got some time to put that together. Rick had brought us some maps in the past. We had some good maps, so each district was able to see how stuff gets done. And the pothole one I'd like to have, I guess, right before spring thaw, when that becomes a big problem. And, we also talked about, good communications with the public. The police department and the fire department have done a fantastic job of using the videographer to get their message out their way and get people to understand who they are and what they do. And they lend him out. And so we talked about maybe utilizing that to create some more of that content, because the DPW has a great Facebook page and they put updates on it, but it's not as visible and it's not posted on as often as what the public safety ones are. So those are just a couple of things that we talked about that he's willing to do for us so that we have good information.
For the pothole one, I'd like to know if there's a maximum size for a pothole before it's considered a road reconstruction.
Or a sinkhole?
We don't have an actual size. A lot of it is based on the overall road. We'll look at everything from, the curb and gutter, the infrastructure under it. Size, we can pretty much patch anything up to the whole size of the road. But until it gets decided, that we're going to do a bigger project on it, our primary option is just to keep filling.
Anybody else have questions for Dustin? Go ahead, Pat.
I would just echo kind of the essence of what Lisa was saying. Whenever Public Works responds quickly to a citizen concern, that citizen is impressed. I mean, it happens a lot, and there've been, times when somebody, there's something goofy happened with a snow plowing, and somebody goes out there with a snow plow, and the resident will be on the street, they'll roll down their window and talk to them. That's gold, that's really good stuff. So, all you can do for that is great.
Yep, thank you.
Anything else? Welcome. Thank you
All
for
right.
coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin.
Okay, anything else on your report, Eric, that you've put out for us? I mean, go ahead, Lou.
Thank you. I was looking through this, and when are you expected to start run reconstruction on Rosecrans?
TJ should have a better handle on that.
Me-
We
Go ahead.
just sent out the construction startup letters on Tuesday. So the earliest, right now, that crew is working on South Fifth Avenue. So as soon as they're done over there, they're gonna move over to Rosecrans. So they can start as soon as Wednesday of next week, but, anywhere between Wednesday or Monday of the following week. So, right around the corner.
Thank you.
Good deal. Any additional questions on the report that Eric put together for us? Because if not, we'll place his report on file if we don't have specific questions. Anything notable on the report that you wanted to run through, Eric?
I don't think so. This is really updates. If you have more questions on anything before CISM, this is a great way, I think, for me to put some stuff in writing for you to read for the meetings and ask questions. So please feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Absolutely, we'll do that. Okay, so then item number 3 is to approve the minutes of the May 13th, 2021 meeting, copies of which are in the packets. Anybody have revisions or corrections to the minutes that they need? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion from Ryan, is there a second? Second by Larson. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. Item number 4 is a public hearing with discussion and possible action on vacating and discontinuing an unpaved alley lying west of 827 Turner Street between North 8th Street, North 9th Street, and Augusta Avenue. At this point, I'll open the public hearing for public comment on this particular item. Is anyone in attendance tonight here to comment on that item? The option of discontinuing and vacating an unpaved alley lying west of 827 Turner Street between North 8th Street, North 9th Street, and Augusta Avenue. In public hearing, we asked 3 times. Is anyone in the audience to comment on this item? Last call, is anyone in attendance here to offer public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and the committee can commence discussion amongst itself. And let me switch to that item in the packet. It looks like Alan has that item, and his recommendation is that there is no objection from staff to go ahead and vacate that alley, and there is a petition attached to it where the adjacent residents have asked for it. So with that, is there a motion to proceed with the vacation of the alley?
Second.
Motion by Ryan, second by Wadinsky. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. Item number 5 is discussion and possible action on a petition for annexation. The petitioner is Grundman. Parcel number is 082-2808-062-0994, coming in from the town of Weston. And Alan has this item as well. This one is recommended for approval. The parcel is contiguous with the current city limits and already has water and sewer. Anything you wanted to walk us through on that, Alan?
No, I think just like you said, it is contiguous to the city. It makes sense. There's already sewer and water abutting the property along Northwestern Avenue, and Mr. Gruneman is very anxious to annex.
Okay. And that brings new tax base to us, so we are always glad to have people. So motion by Wadinsky, is there a second? Second by Ryan. Comments or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. Item number 6 is discussion and possible action on parking restrictions on the entrance road to Schulenburg Pool off of Summit Drive. We'll welcome Alan back for that item as well. It's a little narrow street through there.
Right, this is, like I said, it's an entrance to Schulenburg Pool. It's an unnamed street off of Summit Drive that kind of goes into the parking lot for Schulenburg Pool. We received a complaint of parking there, and upon looking into it, you can see the picture that's superimposed onto it, that somebody at one point, DPW had put up a no parking sign there. It's, the sign is deteriorated, obviously, it's almost unlegible. When the sign guys went and looked up to put a new sign, they found out that it wasn't an ordinance for no parking.
Okay.
So we have to, the option is either you take the sign down or you make it, put it in an ordinance and put new signs up.
Right-of-way there certainly isn't wide enough to accommodate parking on
Right.
both sides and still have traffic in and out of the pool or to pass emergency vehicles through. Is there room to permit it on one side? And I guess the other question is there sufficient parking at the pool? We did take the tennis court out when the pool was built to add extra parking, which was super helpful because it was underutilized and expensive to maintain. So have we heard anything from Parks that there's a problem with overflow parking at the pool?
No, I did talk with Jamie Polly and Greg Fricks at the department, and they both recommended that we put no parking on both sides. They didn't see a need for parking there.
Okay, and I've not had complaints from residents, but it's in my area, and actually it's a block from my house, and I know that it's very narrow quarters in there to get people in and out, so I would certainly support the change.
Move to
Motion to
approve.
approve from Wadinsky, is there a second? Second by Larson. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries as well. And now we're cooking right along. Item number 7 is our last item, future agenda items. Anything that you guys can think of immediately that you'd like to talk about next month, that you know you want to see on?
Yes,
Go ahead.
not necessarily next month, but since the previous council closed McIndoe Street because of a development, it took a road out of service that took a lot of residents from up in my area of the city that were traveling that way, that didn't have to go through the downtown. And now they're using Fulton Street. I know, I was there the other day, I noticed Fulton Street's still somewhat busy sometimes of the day, but the road's in pretty bad shape. Is that something we could possibly look at for maybe moving up to at least investigate, see if it needs to be rebuilt or can be rebuilt at a sooner date than maybe we're looking at because of maybe the extra traffic that might be on there, or?
I think we looked at that as part of the riverfront development, didn't we? For the eventual redo on that?
Yeah, the discussion on Fulton Street, obviously, there's some push from downtown to have it reconstructed as well. One of the items was ABC was supposed to, or they're looking at moving. And so we were hoping that that would be a project maybe the TID could fund once we get some development on the riverfront. And then if ABC decides to move, and what would replace that? So we're not, tearing up a new road in a year or two. But it's definitely on the radar, Jim, for.
As long as we're not looking at
Yeah.
far down the future, that'd be great for, I think, those residents up in that area.
Yeah.
And last year, we did restrict parking on the north side at the request of Clover Belt, so that at least people can get through and see a little bit better. So do you still want it on the agenda, or wait a little bit and see how
No,
it
that's
goes?
fine, as long as it's on our minds.
Okay. Anything else that anybody knows they want to talk about for July? If not, if you think of anything before the end of June, let me know. I usually approve the agenda the first week of the month, like about the first, and Lori has it out early. So if you think of anything between now and month end, let me know. Otherwise, we'll have all of the normal reports and, any project stuff that comes up along the way, and the normal construction updates as well, because we've got a lot of stuff underway right now. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Larson, is there a second? Second by Ryan. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. No one's ever opposed? Jim might be. Someday he will. We'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.